This is an off-the-shelf video for the game titled The Maréchaux, Junot and Soult in Portugal, a magazine game published in Vivictus number 102 from January-February 2012. The Maréchaux simulates campaigns led by the French generals and marshals under the consulate in the First Empire. The front of the unit counters show a side flag, and they also have a gold or yellow A printed on them. In normal play, the counters remain like this for simulating some fog of war. The letter A indicates the unit has been activated during the turn. When it's upright, when the A is upright from the player's perspective, the unit is still available for activation. When it is done activating, you invert the counter like that so that the A is inverted to show that it's no longer available for activation. These are British units, infantry, cavalry, artillery, and baggages. The name on the side there, like 1st and 2nd Brigades, 20th LD, generic artillery counter. The black number is the unit's movement points, so 8, 9, 4, and 4. And a cavalry unit has the number 5 up there, which is the unit's morale. These are commanders. The star on Wellesley's counter indicates that he is a commander-in-chief, whereas Loison is a French commander, but does not have a star, so he is a subordinate commander and not a commander-in-chief. Wellesley has a 2, Loison has a 0. The 2 and 0 are the strategic value of the commander, or SV. Higher is better. The game uses event markers. All of these events indicated in red here are British or Allied events, and there are also events in blue for the French side. These event markers are played according to specific rules and specific for each scenario. All markers are played right away. Correction, all event markers are discarded after being played. Some, marked with an asterisk, are to be played right away. Others can be kept and played at a later time. The effects of several markers can be combined, except when otherwise stated in the event's description. This is an example. The red stripe means that it's an Anglo-Allied event marker. It has a name, Berard, which can be looked up in the back of the rules under Chapter 9, Events. It is for the 1808 scenario. So this is Junot, the first scenario. It's an event marker, and the asterisk means that it's played right away. Specifically, from the rules, Berard ends the game at the end of the turn, at the end of the current turn. This is a canicule, or heat wave. There is an Anglo-Allied and a French event marker for this. They both apply to the 1808 scenario, and they're both played immediately. From the rules, the example for the explanation of this event marker is at the beginning of a movement, all stacks must draw an additional fatigue marker. This marker cannot be removed by the presence of baggage or a commander. If the two players draw this event at the same time, there is no cumulative effect, but the two markers are discarded. Here's an example of a French event marker used for both 1808 and the 1809 scenarios. It does not have an asterisk, so this can be saved According to the rules, this can be played during Phase C during a combat. If an infantry unit is part of the stack, add 1 to the French CP or combat potential. So these are just some examples of some of the event markers, and there are quite a few. There are roughly, a quick scan looks like there's about 15 or so event markers for each side. There are various information markers, including fatigue markers. There's a has combated marker. There's a back to the river marker, used to indicate units that have just crossed a stream or river and that have entered a zone occupied by an opposing stack. And you have retreat and demoralized markers. The game uses off-map strength displays. This is the Anglo-Allied strength display right here for the 1808 scenario and the 1809 scenario. The French strength display for the 1808 scenario and 1809 scenario. This is the Junot 1808 scenario. This is almost the entire, this is the southernmost area here, or point, and this is the northernmost. Yeah, so actually the entire map is on screen. This map for Junot 1808 is only the metric version of an 8.5 by 11. So this is the entire map for this scenario. As you can see, it's a point-to-point map. Indicated are principal paths and roads taken by the troops. These points are called zones. They correspond to the stages and are of 3 types. By the way, I'll just go ahead and say in passing, the English translation here is not nearly as good as some other Vivictus rules, but you can certainly figure out what is meant by the text. So we have clear, defensive, or town. So clear are green. These are green zones, clear zones. We have defensive. Okay, defensive are the yellow triangles. And finally, we have the town, like Rio Mayor, Torres Vedras, Sintra, etc., Lisbon. For setup of the 1808 scenario, we have Junot down here in Lisbon. And his force is made up of an infantry unit, dragoon unit, foot artillery unit, horse artillery unit, baggage train, and 2 infantry garrison units. So that stack is on the off-map strength display. And then the only other, a second subordinate leader up here, the Loison leader, starts up here in the Serra de Monteunto mountains there, and he has an infantry unit and 2 dragoons units. So again, his forces are off map as well. And then up here at Rolica, clear terrain, clear zone, there's an infantry unit, chasseurs unit, and an artillery unit. So they are at Gorlitsa, that's for the French side. For the Anglo-Allied, they have their fleet way up here at Peniche Port. And here's Wellesley's counter at Obidos. There's Wellesley. At Obidos, the villa or town. And his force is made up of 3 British infantry units, a Portuguese infantry unit, a British cavalry unit, a Portuguese cavalry unit, 3 artillery units, and baggage trains. So off map, and just the leader counter is on the map there. So this is the simple, straightforward setup for Junot 1808 scenario. The game sequence is broken up into 4 phases. Phase A is initiative, Phase B is events, Phase C is operations, Phase D is administrative. Each side rolls a 6-sided die. So Wellesley rolls a 4, Junot rolls a 5. They add the strategic value of the commander-in-chief. So a roll of 5 plus Junot's 0 is 5. Wellesley's die roll of 4 plus his strategic value of 2 is 6. So he wins the initiative. Side that won the initiative will start actions during the operations phase, but first there's the events phase. Event markers are obtained in 2 ways, by allocation at the beginning of the game, according to the scenario, or by drawing them during the events phase of each turn. For that, the markers are placed in an opaque container, and then 1 marker is drawn at random per turn. Each player receives his own container and his own markers. The player may not draw a marker from his opponent's container. Event markers with a star must be played immediately. The others can be held on to. If there are no markers remaining in the container, the player does not draw an event for that turn. The event markers are played according to the rules for each scenario. A player can decide to tempt fate by returning the event to the bowl or opaque container at a cost of 2 victory points awarded to his opponent. There is no event for the player during that turn. So a check with the scenario indicates that there are 9 Anglo-Allied event markers for the 1808 scenario. The 9 markers are listed in the scenario description, but it actually also corresponds to exactly the 9 that event markers that have 1808 listed on them. And there are 9 for the French as well. Okay, so it is a tiny bit unclear at this point, but we're in the events phase, and it says 1 marker is drawn random per turn. I assume it's 1 per player, because each player has his or her own events marker pool. So the Anglo-Allied drew the guerrilla event marker. The French drew the Elan event marker. Now right away, neither of them are asterisked, so we know that they do not have to be played right away. But now, we talked earlier about what Elan means. Now we'll look at what guerrilla means from the rules. All right, so I'm going to take the French marker, put it aside for the French player to play when chosen. And now the guerrilla event marker is played at the start of an Anglo-Allied operation. Place a marker on the map in a zone free of all friendly and enemy units. If the French stack penetrates this zone, the marker is removed, but the French stack must stop its movement. So it looks like it's a roadblock, so to speak. During a retreat, if a French stack penetrates a zone occupied by a guerrilla, the marker is removed, but if the French stack contains artillery or baggage units, it must eliminate one of them of his choosing. A guerrilla marker placed in a zone at the edge of a connection with a destroyed bridge prevents its repair. A zone with a guerrilla marker cannot be crossed when testing command or fatigue. That actually sounds pretty interesting. So I'll set that aside for the allied player to play when he chooses. So a quick note, I'm playing it this way with my units revealed for solo and practice play. Obviously, this is the way the game is intended to play. So this French marker unit still has the upright A when it's done and cannot be activated again this turn. It'll be inverted like that. What I'll do is that I'll play like this, and when they're done, I'll simply flip them like that, and then I'll flip them back to the front side at the end of the turn. Now we're in the operations phase. We're going to start with the British because they won the initiative. Players are going to alternate conducting one of several options. Activate a stack of units by disengaging or moving, combating or passing. Both players pass consecutively. The operations phase ends, and we'll move to the administrative phase. An activated stack is pivoted. That's what I just talked about. I'll invert them. I'll flip them over to the right side up to show that they are done. Inactivated stack, if a camp. Okay, note that combat is not considered an activation. A unit can very well combat and then disengage during the following operation, move and then combat during the following operation, combat and then combat again if a new enemy stack has penetrated the zone. Okay, so to make it easy, Wellesley's here, I guess. I will send a mixed force along these roads I'll go over here to occupy Rio Mayor. So how do I do that? Command. Before moving, a stack must first pass a command test. So I've identified my mixed force, British infantry, Portuguese infantry, some cavalry, and an artillery unit. So this is the force that I want to move over to Rio Mayor. If I understand the rules correctly, because they're starting with their commander-in-chief, they do not have to pass a command test to move. So I think these road connectors cost 1 movement point. So I think my force here, the slowest is the artillery unit with a movement allowance of 4. So I think it's 1, 2 to occupy Rio Mayor. That stack has only spent 2 movement points so far, as indicated by the PM marker here on this track. There essentially is no stacking limit for units and commanders in a zone, and opposing stacks can occupy the same zone. Okay, I'll back the force all the way back to Obidos. I'm putting the movement marker here back to 0 to start over. Okay. In order, the force moves 1 road connector to the clear zone there. Clear zone. So first they spend a movement point, 1 movement point for the road. Then from this pile right here, they draw a random fatigue marker. So they drew a fatigue 1. Let's put that right here for now. Then they go second movement to the town. I add another movement point to the movement point tracker and draw another random fatigue marker. Draw another fatigue 1. Okay. Okay, now I think the stack moves one more connection to the zone here with the enemy. So they draw another 1 fatigue for the movement, and they draw an extra 1 for the enemy being for the enemy occupying that zone. Okay, so here's the Allied force moving, and the force has accumulated 4 fatigue points. So in order here, I'm going to compare that 4 fatigue to the current morale of all these units. The 1st and 2nd brigades together, according to the off-map display, tells me that their current morale is 4. So it does not exceed, 4 fatigue does not exceed their current morale. The artillery unit here has a morale of 5, so 4 fatigue does not exceed that. I don't think the artillery is factored in here. And then finally we have Trent, the Portuguese infantry, and the off-map display shows that their morale is 3. So the fatigue of 4 exceeds their current morale of 3. So I think that Trent loses a strength step. This is all for marching towards the French force there. So at the moment that the Anglo-Allied force moved into the area with the French to force passage, each side must mark their axes of retreat. The Anglo-Allied have to choose the area, so they take a retreat marker and they put it on the connection that they came from. The French can choose any of these connectors that are not marked with the French marker and that does not lead to an enemy occupied zone. So let's say the French choose this one that comes over to this defensive zone. So instead of trying to force passage, actually the Anglo-Allied side will finish and deactivate in that area. Now it goes to the French, and Loison is going to try to disengage from that area. At the conclusion of the Anglo-Allied movement there, I'm going to take all of the fatigue markers accumulated by that force and put them back into the random draw pool, and I'm going to reset the movement marker to 0 on the movement point track. For the French disengagement attempt, Loison rolled a 5. I then compared the number of cavalry steps in each force to see who has more. The French, Loison has 2 cavalry steps. The Anglo-Allied force here has only 1 cavalry step. So Loison has more cavalry steps. So he's going to subtract 1 from his die roll there of 5. So the modified die roll is 4, which is not enough to succeed. It has to be the modified result has to be 3 or less for the stack to be able to leave the zone and carry out a normal move. So they fail. So they remain in the zone and are considered activated. So I'm going to flip him over because he is now activated. So then the initiative would pass back to the Anglo-Allied side, and we'll say they pass. Then it comes back to the French side. Junot is going to take a force with him and head north, he's going to take all of his regular combat units. He's going to take the baggages with him. And then he has 2 garrison units to consider using. Okay, it appears the garrison units are immobile. So the 2 garrison units will stay in Lisbon. And Junot is going to take the rest of his force and the baggage trains and head north. So his slowest unit is the artillery and baggage trains at 4 movement allowance. So he's going to follow, looking at the map, he can follow roads all the way north to where Loison is here with the Anglo-Allied force, or he can follow the road north to Torres Vedras, which is what he's going to do. So Junot travels one area, one zone. Put the movement marker on 1 for 1 expended movement point, 1 for a road. Again, it's going to be 2 movement points for these trails. So as Junot's force moves here, drawing fatigue markers for their march, they drew a fatigue 1 for this first movement. The commander-in-chief, Junot, allows any commander. So Junot is a commander. So Junot gets to, once and only once during this turn of operations, Junot can basically return a fatigue marker to the pool. Now, since it's a 1, he's not going to bother doing that now because there are far worse results. But also the baggage train. Since Junot has the baggage trains with him, the baggage train also allows him once and only once during this operation to return a fatigue marker. So that's 1. He's going to go a second march, which costs another movement point. He draws another fatigue marker. Oh, that's a 0. That's fine. All right. So then he's going to go another march for another movement point. And he's going to draw another fatigue mark, another 0. So this is really good luck. And then, yeah, he's going to go a 4th march for a 4th movement point, which is the max for the baggage trains and the baggage trains and the foot artillery. So he draws a 4th fatigue marker, and actually he would use his commander's ability there to put it back anyways, just in case. So that was a very lucky march, very low fatigue, no chance of losing strength because of excessive fatigue. Now, just to point out, this was a very good march here. There are multiple fatigue 1s. There is a fatigue 3, which could be devastating for weaker units. And of course, there are fatigue 2s. I think there are 2 fatigue 2s, 1 fatigue 3, a bunch of fatigue 1s, and a few fatigue 0s. So that's kind of the chances you're looking at each time you undertake a march like that. But Junot fairly easily got to Torres Vedras without attrition losses, stragglers, so to speak. Then he would be done. And then we'll say the Anglo-Allied player passes, the French player passes, and we go to the administrative phase. At the end of the turn, we'll remove all the combated markers, all of the backs to the river markers. Test any necessary recuperation of units. Test any necessary rallying of demoralized units. Any demoralized units. Turn all the units to their available side, which in a two-player game with Fog of War means rotating the face-down counters so that the A for activated is upright again, and then move the turn marker forward on the turn track and start over with the next turn.